Little boy calls 911 after seeing his sister struggling, unaware his life was about to change. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and type "love" in the comments. A beautiful piece of good news may come your way very soon. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. The fluorescent lights of the emergency dispatch center buzzed overhead as Sarah Martinez settled into her night shift. The coffee in her thermos still steaming, despite the late December chill that had settled over downtown Detroit. 23 years of taking 911 calls had taught her to expect anything. Domestic disputes that turned deadly, car accidents that claimed entire families, overdoses that left children orphaned. But nothing in her extensive experience could have prepared her for what was about to unfold on this bitter cold evening that would change multiple lives forever. 3 miles away, in a cramped third-floor apartment with peeling wallpaper that had once been cheerful yellow but now resembled aged parchment, 6-year-old Jake Thompson knelt beside a plastic bucket that had seen better days. His small hands, already red from the cold, trembled as he tested the icy water with his fingertips, wincing at the temperature that felt more like winter pond water than anything suitable for human use. His 5-year-old sister Mia sat on the bathroom floor, her blonde curls matted against her pale forehead, lips tinged an alarming shade of blue that reminded Jake of the frozen popsicles they sometimes got as treats in summer. "Jake, I can't." "It's too cold," Mia whispered, her tiny voice barely audible above the wind that rattled the loose window frame with persistent fury. The glass panes were single pane, offering little protection against Detroit's harsh winter, and frost had begun forming along the edges despite being inside their home. Their mother, Christina Thompson, had left for her second job at Mel's all-night diner exactly 26 minutes ago, kissing them goodbye with lips that tasted like the cherry lip balm she wore to hide how chapped they'd become from worry and exhaustion. She had promised she'd be back before midnight, just like every night, but midnight felt like an eternity away when your 5-year-old sister was shivering uncontrollably and looking at you with eyes that trusted you to fix everything. The gas had been shut off 3 days ago, despite Christina's frantic calls to the utility company begging for an extension, explaining that her paycheck from the grocery store had been delayed due to a computer error and her tips from the diner weren't enough to cover the full bill. The space heaters they'd been using as backup had finally given up the ghost yesterday, their electrical circuits overloaded from running constantly, leaving the apartment feeling more like a walk-in freezer than a home where 2 small children were supposed to feel safe and warm. Jake looked at his sister's shivering form and felt something break inside his chest. A sensation he was too young to identify as heartbreak, but old enough to recognize as the moment when he realized that being the man of the house, a title his mother had given him with pride and desperation, meant facing problems that were bigger than his 6-year-old hands could solve. At his age, he had already learned to make peanut butter sandwiches for lunch, to help Mia brush her teeth, to turn on the television when she had nightmares, and to answer the phone politely when grown-ups called asking for money his mother didn't have. But this was different. This was beyond anything he could fix with his small hands and brave heart, and the determination that had carried him through explaining to his kindergarten teacher why he sometimes fell asleep during story time, or why his lunch was sometimes just crackers and whatever packets of ketchup his mother could bring home from the diner. He had watched other kids at school talk about their daddies during show and tell, how they fixed broken bicycles with magical tools that lived in mysterious garages, how they made the monsters go away just by checking under beds and inside closets, how they always knew exactly what to do when things got scary or confusing or impossible. Jake didn't have a daddy, had never had a daddy, but he had seen enough movies and heard enough stories to know that daddies were the special grown-ups who appeared when regular grown-ups couldn't handle the big problems anymore. His eyes fell on the old rotary phone sitting on the kitchen counter, the same beige telephone with actual dials that his mother used to call the landlord when the pipes burst last winter, creating a flood that had ruined their only carpet and left water stains on the walls that looked like sad faces. With the pure logic that only a desperate child could possess, the kind of reasoning that doesn't get complicated by adult knowledge of how the world actually works, Jake picked up the heavy receiver and dialed the 3 numbers every American child learns before they learn to tie their shoes. 911, what's your emergency? Sarah's voice came through clear and professional, the tone she had perfected over 2 decades of crisis management. Jake's small voice trembled as he spoke the words that would change everything. Words that came from a place of such innocent hope that they would haunt Sarah Martinez for the rest of her career. 911, please. Tell Daddy that the water is too cold, we're just kids. Sarah's hand froze above her keyboard, her fingers suspended over keys she had typed on thousands of times before. In all her years of dispatch, handling everything from armed robberies to house fires to medical emergencies that made seasoned paramedics weep, she had never heard anything quite like this. The raw innocence in the child's voice, the desperate hope that somewhere out there in the vast universe was a father figure who could solve this impossible problem, cut through her professional composure like a knife through paper. "Sweetheart, what's your name?" Sarah asked gently, her training kicking in even as her heart began to race with a mixture of professional concern and deep personal emotion. "Jake Thompson. My sister Mia is really cold, and Mommy said daddies fix things when they're broken. Our water heater is broken and Mia's lips are blue like when people are dying in movies. Can you tell our daddy that we need him? Please?" Meanwhile, 27 blocks away in the penthouse office of Sterling Enterprises, a glass and steel monument to American capitalism that rose 43 stories above the Detroit River, Vincent Sterling stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the city skyline that twinkled like fallen stars against the black December night. At 42, he commanded a business empire worth $3 billion, owned properties in 12 countries spanning 4 continents, employed over 15,000 people, and could buy virtually anything money could touch, except the one thing he wanted most. The vast office, decorated with awards and photographs chronicling his rise from middle-class college student to corporate titan, felt as empty as his life had become since losing his wife Elena and their 7-year-old daughter Sophia in a car accident on a rainy Thursday evening 4 years, 2 months, and 16 days ago. He could remember the exact number of days because he had been counting them, marking time in a world that had lost all meaning the moment a drunk driver ran a red light and stole his entire reason for existing. His executive assistant, Margaret, had left hours ago, repeatedly offering to stay late and help with the Morrison acquisition documents, but Vincent had waved her away. He wasn't staying late because he needed to work. Sterling Enterprises practically ran itself at this point, a well-oiled machine that generated wealth with or without his constant attention. He stayed late because the silence of his 20-room mansion in Grosse Pointe had become unbearable, filled with echoes of laughter that would never return and memories that felt more like torture than comfort. The police scanner he kept on his desk, a remnant from his days as a volunteer EMT during college, back when he believed that helping people in crisis was his calling before business school redirected his path toward profit margins and shareholders, crackled with the usual emergency calls of a busy city. Domestic disturbances, traffic accidents, medical emergencies that formed the background noise of urban existence. But then Sarah's voice cut through the static with unusual emotion. "Dispatch to all units, we have a situation involving 2 minors, ages approximately 5 and 6, requesting contact with their father figure. Children appear to be in a dangerous cold environment, possible neglect situation. Though I want to emphasize this doesn't sound like abuse. This sounds like poverty." Vincent's hand stilled on his coffee cup, the ceramic mug that had been a Father's Day gift from Sophia, painted with her tiny handprints and the words, "World's Best Daddy," in purple glitter glue that had somehow managed to survive 4 years of grief and countless washings. Sarah's voice continued, and Vincent could hear the emotion she was trying to suppress, the crack in her professional facade that spoke to something deeper than routine emergency response. "The 6-year-old caller asked us to tell Daddy that the water is too cold, and stated they are just kids. Unit 47, I'm dispatching you to 847 Riverside Avenue, apartment 3B. Handle with extreme care. This one's special." Vincent's blood ran cold, a chill that had nothing to do with the December weather outside his climate-controlled office. 847 Riverside Avenue. He knew that building intimately. He had purchased it 6 months ago as part of an ambitious development project, planning to renovate the entire Riverside district and transform it from a struggling neighborhood into prime real estate. He had personally walked through every apartment in that building, had seen the conditions that ranged from merely shabby to dangerously substandard, and had planned to relocate all the tenants to better housing before beginning construction. But the paperwork had been delayed by city bureaucracy, environmental impact studies, and zoning disputes that had stretched on for months. Families were still living there in conditions that were barely habitable, and Vincent had been so consumed with legal battles and construction permits that he had let the human element fade into background noise. Somewhere in his building, 2 children were suffering in the cold, and their desperate cry for help had somehow found its way to him through the chaos and static of a busy Friday night in Detroit. The weight of realization hit him like a physical blow, a combination of guilt and purpose that made his chest tighten with emotions he hadn't felt since Elena's funeral. Without thinking, without calculating risk or considering consequences the way he had trained himself to do in every business decision, Vincent grabbed his coat and headed for the elevator. For the first time in 4 years, he felt something other than emptiness pulling him forward, something that felt suspiciously like hope mixed with desperate need. 2 children needed help, and perhaps, just perhaps, helping them might begin to heal the gaping wound in his own soul. The drive to Riverside Avenue took Vincent through parts of Detroit he hadn't seen since his college days, when he used to volunteer at homeless shelters and community centers, back when he believed that success meant making a difference rather than making money. Streetlights flickered over cracked sidewalks where weeds pushed through concrete, and many of the storefronts were boarded up with plywood that had been painted over so many times it looked like abstract art. His black Mercedes S-Class felt obscenely out of place in this neighborhood, its heated leather seats and premium sound system, a stark contrast to the reality of families struggling to keep warm in December. When he pulled up to 847 Riverside Avenue, 2 police cars were already parked outside, their red and blue lights casting eerie shadows on the building's brick facade that made the structure look even more worn and desperate than Vincent remembered from his initial inspection 6 months ago. Officer Michael Rodriguez was just stepping out of his patrol car when Vincent approached, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. "Sir, this is an active scene. I'm going to need you to step back," Rodriguez said automatically, his hand instinctively moving toward his radio as he sized up the well-dressed stranger who clearly didn't belong in this neighborhood at this time of night. "I'm Vincent Sterling. I own this building," Vincent replied, pulling out his wallet to show his identification with hands that were steadier than he felt. "I heard the call on the scanner. 2 children?" Rodriguez's expression shifted as he recognized the name, his eyebrows rising slightly. Sterling Enterprises was well known throughout Detroit, and Vincent's face had been in the business pages of the Detroit Free Press often enough, usually in connection with major acquisitions or charitable donations that made for good publicity. "Mr. Sterling? What brings you here personally?" Usually building owners send their property managers for situations like this. "Those children are my responsibility," Vincent said, his voice carrying a weight that surprised even him. "This is my property, and if they're living in dangerous conditions while I've been sitting in boardrooms arguing about permits and environmental assessments." His voice trailed off as he looked up at the building's 3rd floor, where he could see a dim light glowing behind thin curtains that probably provided about as much insulation as tissue paper. Inside apartment 3B, Jake sat on the threadbare couch with his arm protectively around Mia, both of them wrapped in every blanket they could find in the apartment, a collection of mismatched throws that Christina had accumulated from thrift stores and church donations over the years. 2 paramedics were checking Mia's vital signs, while a social worker named Patricia Coleman spoke quietly with them, her voice gentle but professional, as she tried to assess the situation without traumatizing children who had already been through enough. "Where's your mommy, Jake?" Patricia asked, kneeling down to his eye level and speaking in the soft tone she had perfected over 15 years of dealing with children in crisis situations. "She's at work. She works at Hanson's Grocery during the day and Mel's Diner at night so we can have food and pay rent," Jake replied with the matter-of-fact tone children use when discussing things that should break an adult's heart, his small voice carrying the weight of understanding far beyond his 6 years. "She said she'd be back before the moon gets really high in the sky, and she always keeps her promises." Patricia exchanged a meaningful look with the paramedics, one of those silent communications that develop between professionals who work with families in crisis. Mia's body temperature was dangerously low, hovering at 94 degrees, and while she wasn't in immediate danger of hypothermia, The conditions in the apartment were clearly unsafe for children. The temperature inside was barely 50 degrees, cold enough to see their breath when they spoke. "Jake, when you called 911, you asked them to tell your daddy something. Can you tell me about your daddy?" Patricia asked carefully, knowing this was often sensitive territory for children in single-parent households. Jake's face fell, and he pulled Mia closer against him, her small body still trembling despite the blankets. "We don't have a daddy. Mommy says some kids just don't get daddies, but that's okay because we have each other. But Tommy Chen at school says daddies fix everything when it's broken, and our water heater is really broken," and Mia was so cold her teeth were making clicky sounds. His voice broke, and tears began streaming down his cheeks, leaving warm tracks on skin that was red from the cold. "I just wanted someone who knew how to fix broken things to help us. I thought maybe if I asked really nice, they could find us a daddy who could make the water warm again." Outside in the hallway that smelled of old carpet and industrial disinfectant, Vincent climbed the stairs with Officer Rodriguez and Sarah Martinez, who had driven over from the dispatch center after her supervisor arrived to cover the remainder of her shift. She hadn't been able to stop thinking about the call, about the pure hope in that little boy's voice and the way it had cut through her professional detachment like nothing had in years of emergency response. "Mr. Sterling?" Rodriguez said as they reached the third floor, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the narrow walls. "I have to ask, what's your intention here? We have protocols for situations involving minors, and while I appreciate property owners who take responsibility, there are proper channels for these kinds of interventions." Vincent paused at the door to 3B, his hand raised to knock, and realized he didn't have a clear answer. "I honestly don't know," he admitted, his voice quieter than the commanding tone he used in boardrooms and conference calls. "I just know that 4 years ago I lost everything that mattered to me. My wife and daughter died in a car accident, and I've been going through the motions of living ever since. And tonight, I heard a child asking for help, asking for a father. And that child is living in a building I own in conditions that I allowed to continue while I worried about paperwork and profit margins. I can't walk away from that." Sarah studied Vincent's face in the fluorescent hallway lighting and saw something she recognized from her years of crisis response. The look of a man carrying unbearable guilt, someone seeking a chance at redemption even if he couldn't articulate what that might look like. "That little boy's name is Jake Thompson. His sister is Mia. They're 5 and 6 years old. Their mother, Christina, works 2 jobs just to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. She's not neglecting them. She's fighting poverty with everything she has." When Vincent knocked softly on the door, Patricia opened it after checking through the peephole, surprised to see the well-dressed stranger flanked by police officers and a dispatcher. The man didn't look like law enforcement, but he had the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "Ms. Coleman, I'm Vincent Sterling. I own this building. I came as soon as I heard about the children." Patricia's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. In 15 years of social work, dealing with everything from abandoned children to abuse cases to families destroyed by addiction and poverty, she had never had a property owner show up personally at an emergency call involving tenants. Usually, landlords were problems to be dealt with, not solutions walking through the door. "Mr. Sterling, the children are safe for now, but the living conditions here are challenging," she said diplomatically, though her assessment was far harsher. The apartment was clean but inadequately heated, and she could see her breath when she spoke. "The mother isn't home. She's working a night shift. Can I see them? Can I talk to Jake?" Vincent asked, and something in his voice, a combination of authority and vulnerability that Patricia couldn't quite place, made her step aside. "5 minutes," she said firmly. "They've been through enough stress tonight, and I need to protect their emotional well-being." Vincent entered the small apartment and was immediately struck by how clean everything was despite the obvious poverty. The furniture was old but well-maintained, obviously cared for with the kind of attention that spoke to pride rather than neglect. Children's drawings were taped to the walls in careful arrangements, crayon masterpieces depicting stick-figure families and rainbow houses that showed these children had been encouraged to dream despite their circumstances. Despite the bitter cold, there was an unmistakable sense that this was a home filled with love, a place where 2 small children felt safe and valued even when they couldn't feel warm. Jake looked up from the couch when Vincent walked in, his blue eyes wide with curiosity and hope. Even at 6 years old, he could tell this man was different from the police officers and paramedics who had been coming and going. His clothes were nicer, his posture different, and there was something about the way he moved that suggested he was used to fixing problems rather than just responding to them. "Are you the daddy?" Jake asked with the directness that only children possess, the kind of question that cuts straight to the heart of adult complications and gets to what really matters. Vincent felt his breath catch in his throat, a physical response to words that he had never expected to hear again. He knelt down slowly, bringing himself to Jake's eye level, and saw in this brave little boy's face an echo of his own daughter's fearless curiosity about the world. "No, Jake, I'm not your daddy," Vincent said gently, his voice carrying more emotion than he had intended. "But I heard what you told the 911 lady and I came because I wanted to help. Sometimes grown-ups can help each other even when they're not family." "Can you fix our water heater?" Jake asked, his voice carrying the kind of hope that could break hearts. "Mia gets really cold, and Mommy cries sometimes when she thinks we're sleeping because she can't make it warm for us. She tries really hard, but the heater is too broken for Mommy's to fix. It needs Daddy fixing." The simple question hit Vincent harder than any business negotiation or corporate crisis he had ever faced. Here was a child, asking for the most basic human need, warmth and safety, and looking at him with the kind of trust that Vincent hadn't seen directed at him since his daughter had asked him to check under her bed for monsters one last time. "Jake, what if I told you that I could fix the water heater and the heat and make sure you and Mia never have to be cold again?" Vincent heard himself saying, words that came from a place deeper than logic or business sense. Jake's eyes lit up with an expression of pure joy, but then his face grew serious with the gravity that children sometimes display when they're trying to protect themselves from disappointment. "Do you promise?" Because grown-ups sometimes promise things and then they forget, or they get too busy, or they decide it costs too much money. Vincent looked at this brave little boy, sitting protectively next to his sister who was finally beginning to warm up under the paramedics' care, and felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. For 4 years, he had been going through the motions of living, building wealth and acquiring properties and making deals that meant nothing to him. But this moment, this question from a 6-year-old who had taken responsibility for his sister's welfare, felt more real than anything he had experienced since losing his family. "Jake, I promise," Vincent said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. "And I never break my promises to children." As if summoned by the sincerity in Vincent's voice, the apartment door opened and Christina Thompson rushed in, still wearing her black waitress uniform from Mel's Diner, with its cheerful red name tag that seemed absurdly bright against the stress written across her face. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a ponytail that had loosened during her frantic drive home, and her cheeks were flushed with panic and exhaustion from running up 3 flights of stairs after seeing the police cars parked outside her building. "Jake, Mia, oh God, what happened?" She looked around at the crowd of officials in her small living room, paramedics packing up their equipment, a social worker with a clipboard, police officers with serious expressions, and a well-dressed stranger who didn't fit any category she could identify. Her eyes finally landed on Vincent, taking in his expensive coat and the way he carried himself with quiet authority. "Who are you?" Before anyone could answer, Jake jumped up from the couch and ran to his mother with the kind of enthusiasm that only children can maintain even in crisis situations. "Mommy, I called 911 like you taught me, and they sent us a daddy helper to fix our water heater." Christina's confused gaze moved from her son to Vincent, and she felt the ground beneath her feet shift in a way that had nothing to do with the building's aging foundation. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" Patricia Coleman stepped forward with the practiced calm that came from years of explaining complex situations to overwhelmed parents. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm Patricia Coleman with Child Protective Services. Your children are safe, but we need to discuss the living conditions here. The heating situation has created an unsafe environment." Christina's face went pale, the color draining from her cheeks as her worst fears materialized in front of her. "CPS? No, please, you don't understand. I work 2 jobs. I'm doing everything I can possibly do. They're not neglected. I love them more than life itself. They're fed, they're clean, they know they're loved." I just can't afford to fix everything that breaks. Vincent watched this young mother's world start to collapse in real time and felt an overwhelming urge to intervene, to use whatever power and resources he possessed to stop this family from being torn apart by circumstances beyond their control. Christina couldn't be more than 28 years old, with the same blonde hair as her children and eyes that held the bone-deep exhaustion of someone fighting a losing battle against poverty while trying to maintain hope for her children's sake. Mrs. Thompson, Vincent said, stepping forward and extending his hand in a gesture that was both professional and personal. I'm Vincent Sterling. I own this building. Christina's expression shifted from confusion to fear, her protective instincts kicking in as she automatically stepped closer to her children. Oh God, are you here to evict us? The rent's not due until Friday, and I swear I'll have it. I just need 2 more days for my paycheck to clear. Please don't throw us out in December. No, Vincent said firmly, his voice carrying the kind of certainty that came from having made a decision that felt more right than anything he had done in years. I'm not here about rent. I'm here because your son Jake called 911 tonight, and through circumstances that I'm still trying to understand, his call found its way to me. He asked them to tell his daddy that the water was too cold. Christina looked down at Jake, who was now clinging to her legs with the fierce grip of a child who sensed that important grown-up decisions were being made around him. You called 911? Baby, why didn't you wait for Mommy? Mia was shaking really bad, and her lips turned blue like in the movies when people are dying. Jake explained with the logic of a 6-year-old who had been forced to become the family's early warning system. I remembered you said if there's ever a really big problem that Mommy can't fix, I should call 911. And I thought maybe they could find us a daddy to help, because Tommy Chen says daddies know how to fix heaters and make everything warm again. Tears began streaming down Christina's face as the full weight of what her son had experienced hit her. She knelt down and pulled both children against her, holding them with the fierce protectiveness of a mother who would die before letting anything happen to her babies. Oh, sweetheart. We talked about this. It's just us 3, remember? We're a team, and teams take care of each other. I know, Mommy, Jake said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. But teams sometimes need coaches, and daddies are like coaches for families. They teach you how to do the hard stuff. Vincent found himself struggling to maintain his composure as he watched this family navigate crisis with a combination of love and pragmatism that reminded him painfully of his own family's dynamics before tragedy struck. The child's reasoning was so pure, so hopeful, that it cut through every defense Vincent had built around his heart over the past 4 years. Mrs. Thompson, Patricia interjected gently, consulting her notes. The immediate concern is the heating situation. With temperatures dropping below freezing tonight and forecast to stay there for the next week, this apartment isn't safe for the children. The temperature in here is 52 degrees, which constitutes an emergency situation for minors. I know the heater's broken, Christina said desperately, her voice cracking with the strain of trying to hold everything together. I called the super 3 times this week, but Mr. Peterson says the parts are expensive and it might be weeks before the building management company approves the expense. I've been using space heaters, but they keep burning out because the electrical system is old. I'm doing everything I can. Officer Rodriguez cleared his throat and spoke with the reluctance of someone who understood that sometimes the law created more problems than it solved. Ma'am, given the current conditions and the safety concerns, we may need to arrange temporary placement for the children until the heating situation is resolved. It's not about your parenting, it's about immediate safety. No. Christina's voice broke completely, the sound of a mother's heart shattering. Please, they're all I have. We've never been apart. I'll figure something out. I'll take them to my sisters in Ohio, or we'll stay at the homeless shelter. Just please don't take my babies. Vincent had been silent through this exchange, processing the bureaucratic machinery that was about to separate a loving family because of poverty and a broken heater. Now he stepped forward with the kind of decisive energy that had built his business empire. There's another option, he said quietly, and something in his tone made everyone in the room turn to look at him. Patricia raised an eyebrow. Mr. Sterling, I have a house. A very large house with more bedrooms than I know what to do with and heating that works perfectly. Vincent looked directly at Christina, his voice steady and sincere. Mrs. Thompson, What if you and the children stayed there while I have this entire building properly renovated with working heat and modern electrical systems? The room fell completely silent except for the sound of wind rattling the windows. Christina stared at Vincent as if he had spoken in a foreign language, her mouth slightly open in shock. "I'm sorry, what?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm offering you and your children a place to stay. Clean, warm, safe. With no rent and no obligations except letting me help you get back on your feet. You could keep your jobs if you want, or take time to find something better. Whatever works for your family." Patricia stepped closer to Vincent, her professional instincts kicking in. "Mr. Sterling, while your offer is extraordinarily generous, there are protocols for situations like this. Background checks, home inspections, legal considerations. We can't just place children in someone's home without proper vetting." "Then let's expedite every single one of those processes," Vincent said with the kind of quiet authority that came from years of making things happen. "I'll cover any costs, any fees, hire any investigators you need. I'll have my legal team handle all the paperwork. These children shouldn't spend another night in the cold because of bureaucracy." Christina was shaking her head slowly, trying to process what was happening. "I don't understand. You don't even know us. We're complete strangers. Why would you do this?" Vincent knelt down so he was at Jake's eye level again, his expensive suit crumpling against the worn carpet. "Jake, can I tell you something about daddies?" Jake nodded solemnly, his blue eyes wide with attention. "Sometimes when a daddy loses his family, he gets very sad and doesn't know how to be happy anymore. His house becomes quiet and empty, and he forgets how to smile or laugh or remember what it feels like to have people to take care of." Vincent's voice was gentle but carried the weight of profound loss. "And sometimes when that daddy meets children who need help, helping them helps fix the broken parts inside the daddy too." Jake studied Vincent's face with the intensity that only children possess when they're trying to understand something important about the adult world. "Are you a broken daddy?" "Yes, Jake, I am. And if we let you help us, will it help fix you?" Vincent felt tears threatening for the first time in years, a combination of grief and hope that he hadn't experienced since Elena's funeral. "I think it might, Jake. I really think it might." Jake looked at his mother, then back at Vincent, then at Mia, who was watching the conversation with wide eyes. "Mommy, I think we should help fix the broken daddy. And maybe he can help fix our broken heater too." Christina was crying openly now, overwhelmed by the kindness of this stranger and the wisdom of her 6-year-old son, who seemed to understand something about human connection that adults often missed. "Mr. Sterling, I can't accept charity. I've never taken handouts. I work for everything my children have, eh?" "It's not charity," Vincent said, standing and facing her directly with the kind of honesty that cut through pretense and social convention. "It's mutual aid. You need shelter and stability, and I need." He paused, searching for words to describe a longing he had buried under years of grief. "I need to remember what it feels like to have a family in my house again. I need to remember what it sounds like when children laugh in rooms that have been silent for too long." Sarah Martinez, who had been quietly observing from the corner, stepped forward with the wisdom that came from 23 years of seeing humanity at its best and worst. "Mrs. Thompson, I've been a 911 dispatcher for over 2 decades. I've taken thousands of calls from people in crisis, and I've never seen anything like what happened tonight. Your son's call, Mr. Sterling, showing up here. Sometimes the universe puts people exactly where they need to be at exactly the right moment." Mia, who had been quiet throughout the entire exchange, suddenly spoke up in her small voice that seemed to carry more wisdom than her 5 years should have allowed. "Mommy, can the nice man make the water warm so we don't have to be cold anymore?" Christina looked down at her daughter, then at Jake, who was nodding encouragingly, then at the social worker who was making notes that could determine her family's future. Finally, she looked at Vincent Sterling, this stranger who had appeared in their lives like something out of a fairy tale, offering solutions that seemed too good to be true. If we did this, it would just be temporary, right? Until I can get us back on our feet and find a better place?" "As temporary or as permanent as you need it to be," Vincent replied without hesitation. "No pressure, no expectations, no strings attached. Just a warm place to sleep and time to figure out what comes next without worrying about frozen pipes or broken heaters." Patricia was taking notes rapidly, her mind already working through the logistics. I'll need to conduct an emergency home inspection of your property, run comprehensive background checks, and file temporary custody arrangements. It's highly irregular, but given the circumstances and the immediate safety concerns for the children. Whatever you need, Vincent said. I'll have my lawyers expedite everything, and my home is available for inspection immediately. I want this done properly and legally. Jake tugged on Vincent's coat with the persistence of a child who had something important to say. Mr. Vincent, if you're gonna be our helper daddy, can I call you something special? Vincent's breath caught as he looked down at this brave little boy who had somehow managed to find hope in the darkest of circumstances. What would you like to call me, Jake? Can I call you Mr. Dad? Because you're like a dad but not my real dad, so you're Mr. Dad. The simplicity and sweetness of it broke something open in Vincent's chest that had been locked away since the day he buried his own daughter. Mr. Dad sounds absolutely perfect, Jake. As the officials began making arrangements and Christina packed a bag for the children with hands that shook from emotion rather than cold, Jake pulled Vincent aside with the seriousness of someone about to share an important secret. Mr. Dad, thank you for coming when I called for help. I knew if I asked really nice, somebody would hear us. Vincent knelt down one more time, looking into eyes that held more courage than most adults ever managed to find. Thank you for calling, Jake. You saved me too, even if you don't understand how yet. Little did any of them know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would test them all in ways they couldn't imagine, challenge everything they thought they knew about family and love, and ultimately prove that sometimes the most broken people are exactly what each other needs to become whole again. 3 days later, Christina Thompson stood in the marble foyer of Vincent Sterling's Grosse Pointe mansion, her worn duffel bag looking comically out of place against the backdrop of crystal chandeliers and hand-carved mahogany panels that probably cost more than she made in a year. The house was everything she had imagined a billionaire's home would be, yet somehow it felt less like a palace and more like a museum. Beautiful, impressive, and utterly devoid of the warmth that made a house feel like a home. Jake and Mia pressed close to her sides, their eyes wide as they took in surroundings that seemed to belong in a fairy tale. The ceiling soared 20 feet above their heads, adorned with intricate plasterwork that depicted scenes of classical mythology, while a grand staircase curved gracefully upward like something from a Hollywood movie. Everything was perfect, polished, and pristine, and completely intimidating to a family who had been sharing a broken-down apartment just 72 hours earlier. Holy cow, Jake whispered, his 6-year-old vocabulary insufficient to process the grandeur surrounding them. Mr. Dad, do you live in a castle? Vincent, who had been watching their reactions with a mixture of pride and sudden self-consciousness, found himself seeing his home through their eyes. When Elena and Sophia had been alive, this house had been filled with laughter, artwork stuck to the refrigerator with magnets, and the comfortable chaos that comes with family life. Now it felt like exactly what it had become, a monument to success that nobody lived in, just existed within. It's just a house, Jake, Vincent said gently, though even as he spoke the words, he realized how inadequate they sounded. A very big house that's been much too quiet for much too long. Patricia Coleman completed her preliminary assessment with efficiency, born of years of home visits, but her expression remained serious. Mr. Sterling, while your EMT credentials and the emergency circumstances justify the immediate placement, I need to be clear. This is a 72-hour emergency authorization only. We'll need comprehensive background checks, home inspection, and court approval for anything longer term. Whatever it takes, Vincent said. I'll have my lawyers expedite everything, and I understand this is temporary until all protocols are followed. The children have been through trauma, Patricia continued, and while your intervention was necessary, we need to ensure stability. Any disruption to this arrangement could be harmful. Mr. Sterling, I have to ask, have you considered the long-term implications of this arrangement? These children have been through trauma, and attachment issues could develop if this situation becomes too comfortable and then ends abruptly. Vincent paused in the middle of showing Mia how the smart home system could dim the lights with voice commands. Ms. Coleman, I've spent 4 years learning that life can change in an instant, that the people you love can be taken away without warning. I'm not making promises about forever because I've learned that forever isn't something any of us can guarantee. But I can promise that whatever time we have together, these children will be safe, warm, and loved. Christina, who had been silent through most of the transition, finally spoke up. Mr. Sterling, Vincent, I need you to understand something. My children have never known any life but struggle. They've learned to be grateful for small things, to not ask for much, to understand that money doesn't grow on trees. This, she gestured around the opulent foyer, this is going to confuse them. They're going to think this is normal and when we leave. Who says you have to leave? Vincent asked quietly, the question hanging in the air like a challenge to assumptions that none of them had fully examined. The question created an uncomfortable silence that was broken by Jake tugging on Vincent's sleeve. Mr. Dad, can I ask you something important? Of course, Jake. In the movies, when daddies fix things, they usually stay fixed forever. Are you going to fix us forever or just until we're not broken anymore? The innocent question hit all three adults like a physical blow. Christina felt her chest tighten with the fear that her son was already becoming attached to something that couldn't last. Patricia recognized the exact attachment issue she had been worried about materializing in real time. And Vincent felt the weight of responsibility for two small hearts that had already been through too much disappointment. Jake, Vincent said carefully, kneeling down to the child's eye level. Some things that get broken can be fixed completely, and some things heal but leave little scars that remind us what we've been through. The most important thing isn't whether we can fix everything perfectly. It's that we take care of each other while we're healing. Over the following weeks, the Sterling mansion underwent a transformation that had nothing to do with interior decorating, and everything to do with the presence of life returning to rooms that had been silent for too long. Jake's laughter echoed through hallways where Vincent had walked alone for years, while Mia's artistic endeavors gradually replaced the formal artwork on the refrigerator in the gourmet kitchen that had rarely been used for anything more elaborate than reheating takeout. Christina maintained her jobs initially, partly out of pride and partly out of a practical understanding that this situation, no matter how wonderful it seemed, was temporary. She would leave for work each morning with the same sense of unreality that had plagued her since moving in, kissing her children goodbye in a house that cost more than most people's annual salaries, then spending 8 hours serving coffee to truckers and stocking shelves with canned goods. But Vincent was struggling with his own adjustment. Having children in the house again brought back memories that were both wonderful and excruciating. The sound of small feet running up the grand staircase reminded him of Sophia's daily races to see if she could reach the top before he finished counting to 10. Watching Jake and Mia explore the house with wonder and excitement brought back the joy Elena had taken in creating a home that was both elegant and comfortable, a place where a billionaire could still step on Legos in his bare feet. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening 3 weeks after the Thompsons had moved in. Vincent was working late in his home office when he heard crying coming from the direction of the children's rooms. He found Mia sitting on the floor of her bedroom, a space that had once been Sophia's and was now decorated with princess themes and stuffed animals that Vincent had purchased with the enthusiasm of a man trying to build a childhood from scratch. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Vincent asked, sitting down beside her on the plush carpet. "I miss our old house," Mia said through her tears, her 5-year-old face scrunched up with an emotion too complex for her to fully understand. "This house is really pretty, but it doesn't smell like Mommy's cookies, and the walls are too white, and everything is too perfect." Vincent felt his heart break for this little girl who was essentially homesick for poverty because poverty had been home. "What did your old house smell like?" "Like Mommy's vanilla candles and the soap she uses to wash our clothes, and sometimes like the pizza place downstairs when they made pepperoni pizza on Fridays." Before Vincent could respond, Jake appeared in the doorway, having been awakened by his sisters crying. "Mia, what's wrong?" "I want to go home," Mia said simply. Jake came and sat on her other side, his 6-year-old wisdom on full display. "But Mia, home isn't a place. Mommy told us that. Home is where we're together and safe and loved. And Mr. Dad loves us and we're safe here and we're still together. But what if Mr. Dad gets tired of us? What if we're too loud or we break something expensive or he remembers that we're not his real kids?" Vincent felt tears threatening as he realized that these children were living with the same fear he was. that this beautiful, fragile thing they were building together might not survive the weight of reality. Mia, Jake, can I tell you a secret? Both children nodded solemnly. I'm scared too. I'm scared that you might decide you don't like living with a grown-up who doesn't know all the right things to do, who sometimes gets sad when he looks at old pictures, who had to learn how to make pancakes from YouTube videos because he'd forgotten how to cook for children. You're scared of us? Jake asked with amazement. Not scared of you, scared of losing you, just like you're scared I might get tired of you. But here's what I've learned. Being scared together is better than being scared alone. Meanwhile, downstairs in the kitchen, Christina was having her own emotional reckoning. She had come home from her shift at the diner to find a note from Vincent's housekeeper, Margaret, explaining that she had taken the liberty of baking chocolate chip cookies because she'd noticed Mia looking sad earlier. The kitchen smelled like vanilla and butter and childhood memories, and Christina found herself crying over a plate of cookies that represented kindness she had never expected to receive. When Vincent came downstairs an hour later, having successfully negotiated bedtime stories and tucked both children into beds that cost more than Christina's monthly salary, he found her sitting at the kitchen island with tears streaming down her face. Christina, what's wrong? Everything, she said, laughing and crying simultaneously. Everything is wrong and everything is perfect, and I don't know how to handle either one. Vincent poured himself a cup of coffee and sat across from her, waiting for her to continue. My daughter misses our old apartment. Our old apartment where we were cold and worried about money and ate cereal for dinner sometimes because that's all we could afford. She misses it because it was ours, because we built it together, because even when everything was broken, we were a family. And now? Now we're living in a fairy tale. And fairy tales always end. The prince always goes back to his castle, and Cinderella always has to give back the dress, and my children are going to have to learn how to live without marble bathrooms and gourmet kitchens and a man who looks at them like they hung the moon. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, processing words that cut straight to the heart of his own fears. Christina, what if this doesn't have to be temporary? Don't, she said firmly. Don't say things like that. Don't make my children fall in love with a life they can't keep. What if they could keep it? What if you could keep it? Christina stared at him across the kitchen island, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and terror. Vincent, you can't just decide to keep us like we're stray cats you've gotten attached to. We're people with our own lives and dreams, and we're not your replacement family. The words hung in the air between them, brutal in their honesty. Vincent felt the accusation hit home because part of him wondered if that's exactly what he was doing, trying to fill the Sophia and Elena-shaped hole in his life with ready-made substitutes. You're right, he said quietly, and I'm sorry if I've made you feel like that's what this was about. But Christina, what if it's not about replacing anything? What if it's about building something new? Before she could answer, Jake appeared at the bottom of the stairs in his pajamas, looking small and vulnerable in the vast space of the mansion's first floor. Mommy? Mr. Dad? Are you fighting? Because when grown-ups talk in quiet voices late at night, that usually means they're mad at each other. Both adults felt their hearts break simultaneously at the anxiety in the child's voice, the learned wariness of a 6-year-old who had already experienced too much adult conflict and uncertainty. No, sweetheart, Christina said, opening her arms to her son. We're not fighting. We're just talking about grown-up stuff. Are we going to have to leave? Jake asked, the question that had been haunting all of them finally spoken aloud. Vincent and Christina looked at each other across the kitchen, both realizing that their individual fears and uncertainties were affecting the very children they were trying to protect. I don't know, Jake, Christina answered honestly. But whatever happens, we'll face it together, okay? Just like we always have. Jake nodded, but his face remained troubled. Mr. Dad, if we do have to leave, will you visit us sometimes? Because I think you get lonely in this big house, and we get lonely too sometimes, and maybe we could help each other not be lonely. Vincent knelt down and pulled Jake into a hug that felt like coming home and breaking apart at the same time. Jake, I promise you that no matter what happens, you and Mia and your mommy will always be part of my family. Distance doesn't change that, and time doesn't change that. As Christina watched this man embrace her son with genuine love and careful gentleness, she realized that the fairy tale she was so afraid of wasn't the problem. The problem was her own fear that she didn't deserve happiness, that accepting love and help somehow made her weak or dependent or less of a mother. But looking at Jake's face as he hugged Vincent, seeing the peace and security that had replaced the worry lines that no 6-year-old should have, Christina began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop being afraid of good things. 2 months into their unconventional living arrangement, Vincent Sterling thought he had found a rhythm that worked for everyone. The children were thriving. Jake had started kindergarten at Grosse Pointe Academy, where his natural intelligence was finally being challenged and nurtured, while Mia spent her days with Margaret, Vincent's housekeeper, who had embraced the role of surrogate grandmother with enthusiasm that surprised everyone, including herself. Christina had reluctantly agreed to reduce her hours at both jobs, accepting Vincent's argument that the children needed stability and that she deserved rest after years of exhausting herself to keep their heads above water. She was still uncomfortable with accepting what felt like charity. But seeing Jake come home excited about learning to read chapter books and watching Mia blossom with the security of regular meals and consistent bedtime routines had gradually worn down her resistance to accepting help. Vincent himself was experiencing something he hadn't felt since Elena and Sophia died: purpose beyond profit margins and acquisition targets. He found himself leaving work earlier to help Jake with homework, scheduling business calls around Mia's afternoon tea parties with her stuffed animals, and discovering that domestic life could be just as fulfilling as corporate success when it was built on genuine care rather than obligation. But their carefully constructed peace was about to be shattered by forces none of them had anticipated. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning when Vincent's longtime business partner and friend, Marcus Webb, appeared unannounced at the Sterling mansion. Marcus had been struggling with his own financial problems. Poor investments had left him overextended, and he'd been counting on Vincent's consistent business focus to maintain their partnership's profitability. Vincent's recent distraction from work was threatening deals that Marcus desperately needed to succeed. "Vincent, we need to talk," Marcus said without preamble when Margaret showed him into the home office where Vincent was reviewing contracts, while Jake practiced reading aloud at a small desk they'd set up in the corner. "Can it wait until tonight? Jake's working on a book report about dinosaurs, and I promised to help him with the hard words." Marcus looked at Jake, who was carefully sounding out Tyrannosaurus, and his expression hardened. "No, Vincent, it can't wait, and we need to talk privately." Something in Marcus's tone made Vincent look up from the purchase agreement he'd been reviewing. In 20 years of business partnership, he had rarely seen Marcus this agitated. "Jake, buddy, why don't you go find Mia and see if Margaret needs help with lunch?" After Jake left, carefully carrying his book and wearing the serious expression of a child who knows adults are about to discuss something important, Marcus closed the office door and turned to face Vincent with barely contained anger. "What the hell are you doing, Vincent?" "I'm reviewing the Morrison acquisition papers. You asked me to expedite them. Don't play dumb with me. I'm talking about the family you've moved into your house. Do you have any idea what people are saying? What the board is saying?" Vincent set down his pen and gave Marcus his full attention, feeling the familiar cold dread that preceded bad news. "What are people saying, Marcus?" "They're saying you've lost your mind. They're saying grief has finally broken you completely, and you're playing house with strangers because you can't accept that Elena and Sophia are gone. They're questioning your judgment, your mental stability, your ability to run a $3 billion company. And what do you think, Marcus?" Marcus ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "I think you're my best friend, and I think you're making the biggest mistake of your life. Vincent, these people aren't your family. You've known them for 2 months. You're projecting your grief onto a situation that has nothing to do with you, and it's going to destroy everything we've built." Vincent stood up slowly, his voice deadly quiet. "Careful, Marcus." "No, I won't be careful. Someone has to say this. You think helping these people makes you feel better about Elena and Sophia? You think playing daddy to some poor kid is going to bring your daughter back? It's not, Vincent. It's going to end badly. And when it does, you're going to be more broken than you were before. Get out. Vincent, get out of my house now." Marcus stared at his oldest friend, seeing something in Vincent's eyes that he'd never seen before. A protective fury that suggested he had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "Fine. But when this falls apart, When reality sets in, and you realize you can't fix your grief by adopting someone else's problems, don't say I didn't warn you. After Marcus left, Vincent sat alone in his office, staring at the family photo on his desk. Elena and Sophia laughing at some joke he could no longer remember, frozen in a moment of happiness that felt like it belonged to someone else's life. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to consider the possibility that Marcus might be right. Upstairs, Christina was having her own crisis of faith. She had received a call from her sister Jenny in Ohio, who had seen news coverage of Vincent Sterling's unusual living arrangement with a local family on a Detroit gossip blog that specialized in reporting on the private lives of wealthy business figures. "Chris, what are you doing?" Jenny's voice crackled through the phone with a mixture of concern and excitement. "The internet is saying you're living with some billionaire. Are you dating him? Is this why you haven't returned my calls?" "It's not like that, Jen. It's complicated." "Complicated how?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you hit the lottery. Rich guy falls for poor girl with kids. That's literally the plot of every romance novel ever written." Christina felt a familiar frustration at her sister's tendency to oversimplify complex situations. "He's not some Prince Charming, and I'm not some damsel in distress. He needed help as much as we did. His wife and daughter died in a car accident, and he's been living like a ghost in this huge house for 4 years. So you're his grief counselor now? Chris, listen to yourself. You moved your kids into a stranger's house because your heat broke. That was supposed to be temporary. Now you're talking like you're his emotional support system." "Maybe I am. Maybe we're each other's emotional support system. Is that so wrong?" "It's wrong if you're forgetting who you are in the process. Chris, you're independent, you're strong, you take care of yourself and your kids. You don't need some rich guy to rescue you." After ending the call, Christina found herself standing in the bedroom that Vincent had given her. A space larger than her entire apartment had been, decorated in soft blues and whites that somehow managed to feel both elegant and comfortable. She looked at herself in the full-length mirror and tried to see what others saw. A poor single mother who had lucked into luxury. A woman who was either incredibly fortunate or making a terrible mistake. The reflection staring back at her looked healthier than she had in years. The constant stress lines around her eyes had softened. Her hair was shiny from eating regular meals and getting adequate sleep, and she was wearing clothes that fit properly instead of whatever was cheapest at the thrift store. But was this really her, or was she playing a role in someone else's life? Her introspection was interrupted by raised voices from downstairs. Jake burst into her room, his face flushed with excitement and indignation. "Mommy, there are people outside with cameras and they're asking Margaret questions about us." Christina's blood ran cold. She rushed to the window and saw what Jake was talking about. 3 news vans parked outside the mansion's gates, reporters with microphones standing on the sidewalk, photographers with long lenses pointed at the house. Vincent appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "Christina, we need to talk." They gathered in Vincent's office while Margaret kept the children occupied in the kitchen, away from the windows where telephoto lenses might capture images of them. Vincent explained about Marcus's visit, about the rumors circulating in business circles, about the media attention that was now focused on their living arrangement. "Someone leaked information about our situation to the press," Vincent said, his voice tight with anger. "They're calling it everything from a publicity stunt to a midlife crisis to worse." "What could be worse?" Christina asked, though she was afraid she already knew. "They're suggesting that my motives aren't pure. That a 42-year-old billionaire doesn't just invite a young single mother and her children to live in his house without expecting something in return." Christina felt sick. "Oh God, they think we're—" "It doesn't matter what they think," Vincent said firmly. "What matters is protecting you and the children from this circus." "But it does matter," Christina said, her voice rising with panic. "It matters because my children are going to hear these things. It matters because Jake is going to go to school and kids are going to ask him why his mommy lives with a rich man. It matters because people are going to look at us and think I'm some kind of gold digger who used my kids to get a meal ticket." "Christina." "No, Vincent. This is exactly what I was afraid of. This is why I knew this was too good to be true. We don't belong in your world. We never did. Before Vincent could respond, Jake appeared in the doorway again, this time looking scared rather than excited. "Mommy?" A lady with a microphone stopped me and Mia when we were playing in the garden. She asked if Mr. Dad is really our daddy now, and when I said no, she asked if you and Mr. Dad are boyfriend and girlfriend. Christina felt her world tilting off its axis. "What did you tell her, baby?" "I told her that Mr. Dad is our friend who helps us when things are broken, and you're my mommy, and we're a family even if it's different from other families." But she kept asking weird questions and Margaret made us come inside. Vincent knelt down to Jake's level, his heart breaking at the confusion in the child's eyes. "Jake, there are going to be people who don't understand our family, and they might say things that don't make sense or that hurt your feelings. But you know the truth about who we are and how much we care about each other, right? Are we in trouble? Are we going to have to leave because people are asking questions?" Vincent looked at Christina over Jake's head, seeing his own fear reflected in her eyes. They had built something beautiful and fragile, and now the outside world was threatening to destroy it with speculation and judgment and invasive questions that had no good answers. "I don't know, Jake," Vincent said honestly. "But whatever happens, it won't be because you or Mia did anything wrong." That night, after the children were asleep and the news vans had finally left, Vincent and Christina sat in his office trying to figure out how to protect their family from forces neither of them had anticipated. "Maybe Marcus was right," Vincent said quietly. "Maybe I have lost perspective. Maybe I thought I could create a perfect world where grief doesn't matter, and love is enough to solve every problem." "And maybe Jenny was right too," Christina replied. "Maybe I forgot who I am. Maybe I let myself believe in a fairy tale because it was easier than facing reality." They sat in silence for a long moment, both realizing that their carefully constructed bubble of happiness was about to burst, and that the children they both loved were going to pay the price for their naive belief that love could conquer practical realities like social expectations and media scrutiny. But sometimes when everything seems lost, that's when you discover what you're really willing to fight for. The breaking point came 3 days later when Jake refused to go to school. Vincent found him hiding in the library, curled up behind the large leather armchair where Vincent used to read to Sophia, tears streaming down his face as he clutched the dinosaur book that had become his security blanket. "Jake, what's wrong, buddy?" "I don't want to go to school anymore," Jake said, his voice muffled against his knees. "The kids keep asking me if you're my real daddy, and when I say no, they ask if you're mommy's boyfriend, and when I say I don't know, they say mean things." Vincent felt his heart shatter as he realized that their adult problems had spilled over into this innocent child's world. "What kind of mean things?" "Tommy Chen said his dad saw us on TV and said mommy is only nice to you because you have money. And Sarah Williams said her mom said you must be crazy to let strangers live in your house. And Mrs. Peterson, the teacher, keeps looking at me funny and asking if I'm happy at home." Vincent pulled Jake onto his lap, this brave little boy who had been forced to deal with adult complexities that no 6-year-old should have to navigate. "Jake, do you know what I think about when people say those things?" Jake shook his head. "I think about the night you called 911 asking for help. I think about how brave you were taking care of Mia when you were scared too. I think about how you taught me that families don't have to look the same to be real. And I think about how proud I am to be your Mr. Dad, no matter what anyone else says. But what if they're right? What if you only helped us because you felt sorry for us?" Vincent was quiet for a moment, considering how to explain complex emotions to a child who was already carrying too much weight on his small shoulders. "Jake, can I tell you a story about my daughter Sophia?" Jake nodded, settling more comfortably against Vincent's chest. "Sophia used to ask me why I worked so much, why I spent so many hours at the office when I could be home playing with her. And I used to tell her that Daddy had to work hard to take care of our family. But the truth was, I worked because I was good at it, because it made me feel important and successful. Then after Sophia and Mommy died, I kept working even harder because I didn't know how to be anything else." "Were you sad all the time?" "Yes, I was sad all the time. Until the night you called 911 and reminded me what it felt like to be needed for something that actually mattered. You didn't make me feel sorry for you, Jake. You made me feel useful again. You made me remember why being a daddy was the best job I ever had. Meanwhile, downstairs in the kitchen, Christina was having a similar conversation with Mia, who had come home from Margaret's grocery shopping trip full of questions about why people kept staring at them and whispering, "Mommy, are we famous now?" Mia asked, swinging her legs from the kitchen stool where she was eating apple slices. "Not famous exactly, sweetheart. Just, people are interested in our family because it's different from most families." Different how? Christina struggled to find age-appropriate words for a situation that was challenging even for adults to understand. "Well, most kids live with their mommies and daddies who are married to each other. We live with Mr. Dad who isn't married to Mommy, but who cares about us anyway. Is that bad?" "No, baby, it's not bad. It's just unusual, and sometimes people don't understand unusual things. But Tommy Chen's parents are divorced and he lives with his mommy and his stepdad, and nobody talks about them on TV." Christina realized that her 5-year-old had identified the heart of the issue with startling clarity. It wasn't their unconventional family structure that was drawing attention. It was Vincent's wealth and prominence that made their story newsworthy. That afternoon, Vincent called an emergency meeting with his legal team, his public relations firm, and Patricia Coleman from Child Protective Services. The conference room at Sterling Enterprises felt like a war room as they discussed strategies for protecting the children while managing the media circus that showed no signs of dying down. "The simplest solution is for the family to move out," suggested Rebecca Chen, Vincent's head of public relations. "If Mrs. Thompson and the children return to their own housing, the story loses its hook and the media attention will fade." "Absolutely not," Vincent said firmly. "I'm not going to let media speculation drive us apart." Patricia Coleman leaned forward, her expression serious. "Mr. Sterling, I have to be honest with you. The state has received several calls questioning the appropriateness of this living arrangement. While my investigation found no evidence of impropriety, the continued media attention is creating scrutiny that could be harmful to the children." "What kind of scrutiny?" "The kind that could result in a formal review of the temporary custody arrangement. The kind that might require the children to be placed in alternative care while a full investigation is conducted." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Vincent felt the familiar cold dread that preceded loss, the same sensation he'd experienced when the doctor had told him that Elena and Sophia hadn't survived the accident. "There has to be another way," he said quietly. "There is," said David Morrison, Vincent's longtime attorney. "But you're not going to like it." "Tell me." "Marriage." The word hung in the air like an explosion. Vincent stared at David as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. "If you and Mrs. Thompson were to marry, this would become a straightforward case of a man providing for his new family. The media narrative changes completely, and the state has no grounds for questioning the arrangement." "David, that's insane. We're not. Christina and I aren't." "I know what you're not," David said calmly. "But I also know what you are. You're two adults who care deeply about these children and who have built something that works for everyone involved. Legal marriage doesn't have to change the emotional reality of your relationship." Vincent drove home in a daze, David's words echoing in his mind. Marriage. The word felt like betrayal of Elena's memory and salvation for his current family at the same time. How could he even suggest such a thing to Christina? How could he not, if it was the only way to protect Jake and Mia? He found Christina in the garden, pushing Mia on the swing set that he'd had installed the week after they moved in. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, and he could see in her eyes that she knew something had changed. "We need to talk," he said quietly. That evening, after the children were asleep, Vincent and Christina sat in the library where this had all begun, where Jake had hidden that morning, afraid to face a world that didn't understand their family. "Marriage," Christina repeated after Vincent had explained David's suggestion. "You want us to get married to solve a public relations problem." "I want us to get married to protect our children," Vincent corrected. "Christina, if we don't do something, they're going to take Jake and Mia away while they conduct a full investigation. They're going to put them in foster care or group homes while bureaucrats decide whether we're fit to be a family." "But marriage." "Vincent, that's not something you do just to solve a problem. Marriage is supposed to be about love and commitment and what if it could be about those things for us too?" Vincent asked quietly. "Christina, what if this isn't just about protecting the children? What if it's about acknowledging what we've already become? Christina stared at him, her heart racing. What have we become? A family. Not a traditional family, not a family that anyone else understands, but a family nonetheless. You've brought life back into this house, back into my life. Your children have given me a reason to come home, a reason to remember what it feels like to be needed for something that matters. And what have you given us? Security, stability, the chance for Jake and Mia to grow up without worrying about whether there will be heat or food or a safe place to sleep. But more than that. Vincent paused, searching for words to describe feelings he was still discovering. You've given me permission to love again. To believe that losing Elena and Sophia doesn't mean I have to spend the rest of my life alone. Christina was crying now, overwhelmed by the intensity of emotions she'd been trying to keep under control for months. Vincent, I can't marry you just because it's practical, and I can't marry you if you're still in love with your wife. I will always love Elena, Vincent said honestly, just like you'll always love Jake and Mia's father wherever he is. But Christina, love isn't a finite resource. Loving Elena doesn't mean I can't love you, and loving you doesn't mean I'm betraying her memory. Do you love me? Christina asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent looked at this woman who had transformed his life in ways he was still trying to understand. I love the way you make pancakes shaped like dinosaurs for Jake. I love how you sing to Mia when she has nightmares. I love your strength and your independence and the way you've never asked me for anything you didn't absolutely need. I love that you've made this house feel like a home again. So yes, Christina, I love you. Not the way I loved Elena because you're not Elena. I love you the way you deserve to be loved, completely, honestly, and with the full knowledge of who you are and what you mean to me. Christina felt her carefully constructed walls crumbling. This is crazy. People don't get married to solve legal problems. People get married for all kinds of reasons, Vincent said gently. Love, companionship, financial security, family obligations. We'd be getting married for all of those reasons and more. What if it doesn't work? What if we get married and realize we've made a terrible mistake? Then we'll figure it out together just like we figured out everything else. Christina, I'm not asking you to marry me because I think it will solve all our problems. I'm asking you to marry me because I can't imagine my life without you and the children in it. The next morning, Jake found them both in the kitchen, drinking coffee and looking like they hadn't slept much. Mia was already there, eating cereal and chattering to Margaret about the bird's nest they'd discovered in the garden. Are you still sad about the people asking questions? Jake asked, climbing onto Vincent's lap with the casual affection that had developed between them. We're working on that problem, Vincent said carefully. How? Vincent and Christina exchanged a look, both realizing that whatever they decided would affect these children most of all. Jake, Christina said slowly, how would you feel if Mr. Dad became your real dad? If we all became a real family with the same last name and everything? Jake's eyes grew wide. You mean like getting married? Like in movies where the prince and princess have a wedding? Something like that. Jake looked from his mother to Vincent, his 6-year-old mind processing the implications. Would that mean Mr. Dad would be my dad forever? Even if people say mean things about us? Forever, Vincent confirmed. And would it mean we get to stay in this house with the big library and the swings in the backyard? If you want to. Jake was quiet for a moment, then turned to Mia. Mia, do you want Mr. Dad to be our real dad? Mia looked up from her cereal, her 5-year-old face serious. Will he still make chocolate chip pancakes on Saturdays? I'll make chocolate chip pancakes every day if you want, Vincent said, laughing despite the emotional weight of the moment. Then yes, Mia said decisively. I want Mr. Dad to be our real dad. Jake nodded solemnly. Me too. And then when people ask if you're our real daddy, we can say yes, and when they ask if mommy is your wife, we can say yes, and when they ask if we're a real family, we can say yes to that too. 3 weeks later, Vincent Sterling and Christina Thompson were married in a small ceremony in the garden of the mansion that had become their home. Jake served as ring bearer with the solemnity of someone who understood the importance of the occasion, while Mia scattered flower petals with the enthusiasm of a child who had been promised cake afterward. The media coverage was extensive but respectful. the narrative having shifted from scandalous speculation to a heartwarming story of love conquering adversity. The business community accepted the marriage as Vincent's return to stability, while the children's school friends were simply excited to be invited to a real wedding. But for the four people who mattered most, the ceremony was simply the formal recognition of what had already become true. They were a family, forged not by blood or obligation, but by the choice to love and protect each other through whatever challenges life might bring. As Vincent and Christina exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to honor the love they had lost while embracing the love they had found, Jake whispered to Mia, "Now we're really forever family." And in that moment, surrounded by people who had become their chosen family, with the man who had answered a desperate child's call for help now promising to be their father in every way that mattered, the story that had begun with a little boy's faith in the existence of daddies who fix broken things reached its perfect conclusion. Sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that find each other in the darkest moments, proving that love really can fix anything that matters most.